science enthusiasts. I'm your host, Jason Zakowski. I'm a high school chemistry teacher, but you probably know our dogs, Bunsen and Beaker. They're the science dogs on social media. This show takes what's best from their account, the curiosity and fun found there, and swirls it into podcast form. Every week, we're going to take some deep dive into an area of science and look at the research that's going on with our pets. We'll also have an expert guest who will enthrall you with their area of knowledge. This is the Science Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the Science Podcast. We hope you're happy and healthy out there. Oh boy, it's October. It's spooky season. It's fun for us as a family because we like cosplay, but the irony is that Halloween for the regulars is just a normal day for cosplayers. We just get our costumes out and go. I am working on some fun costumes for the dogs. I don't want to put a bunch of time into something that they don't really wear that often. Okay, let's get right to the podcast this week. In science news, we're going to talk about the new antiviral drug that was announced by Merck. What is it? Is it effective? What's going on with that? Because it seems to be a good deal for COVID-19. In pet science, we have a new study, a new story about how hookworm is becoming resistant to the drugs that we give dogs for it and the possible pitfalls there. Our amazing guest in Ask an Expert is Dr. Susanna Harris, who's a science communicator, but also the founder of a really interesting organization called PhD Balance. I can't wait to get to it. Hey dogs, I have this socially awkward friend of mine who's really anxious also, and they just got a PhD in palindrome studies. We just call them Dr. Awkward. Okay, think about it. All right, on with the show, because there's no time like Science Time. This week in science news, well, it's about COVID-19 and the new drug that was announced by Merck. So I posted a while back about how all of the different vaccines made by the different companies like Pfizer, Moderna, JJ, and AstraZeneca, they all have like their vaccine names now, and nobody's calling them by their vaccine name. I think, is the Pfizer one called Comirnaty? Adam makes fun of that every day. He's like, it's like they put a bunch of marbles in their mouth and tried to talk. I think AstraZeneca is Spikevax. Is that what it is? But so I'm a combo. I'm like Comirnaty and Spikevax. So am I Comirnaty Vax or Spikemernity? I don't know. Oh no, the AstraZeneca name is Vaxzevria. Vaxzevria. So if I'm Comirnaty and Vaxzevria, I'm Vaximernity or Comirnavirus. Oh my goodness. But this new drug that was announced by Merck is an antiviral drug that you would take if you already had COVID-19. So if you had a breakthrough infection or you didn't get vaccinated for whatever reason, there's this drug is made for those people. So it's a pill. It's called molnupiravir, and it was tested against a placebo in people who were at high risk to developing disease. So it's a relatively small study. So we have to hedge your bets about this, right? So it could help. All of the different news outlets and all of the different scientists they're talking about, they're like, it seems promising. Around 400 people got the placebo, and 53 of those people, or 14%, were hospitalized. By comparison, only about 7% of those who got the antiviral drug made by Merck were hospitalized. So we're looking at a sample size of less than 1,000 people. So compared to the vaccine, which had hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands, this is a much smaller sample size. And molnupiravir wasn't developed originally for COVID-19. It was developed for just influenza. Of the people who were given the drug or the placebo, were already infected with all of the different variants. And it didn't seem like any variant was more or less effective against the new drug. So finding treatments for people with COVID-19 has been really tough. So far, there's lab-made antibodies that have been authorized in the States for folks who are sick enough to go to the hospital, and we use that the same antibody treatment to people in Canada. There was the big hubbubaloo about hydroxychloroquine, and oh my goodness, don't get me started about ivermectin. And now the whole thing is that this drug by Merck is ivermectin, molnupiravir. No, it's not. It's not at all. It's different. Now, one of the caveats to this drug is it has to be taken early in the infection life, like early. So like just as soon as the person is feeling symptomatic, as opposed to when they're really, really, really sick. The idea is that you can't stop the virus from replicating, because that's what this drug does, when it's too late to save the person, right? If the virus is already spread throughout their whole body and they're already on a ventilator, giving them this antiviral drug is akin, as the study pointed out, to giving somebody antibiotics when they have a wound infection that's all the way down to the bone. Like you kind of missed your window. Now, one of the interesting things from the study that you might have heard is that the results were so promising, they actually shut down the trial early. An independent review panel decided to stop it early and start to apply for emergency authorization. The potential benefits of you putting the drug into circulation right now outweigh the potential risks, and that's what happened with all of the COVID-19 vaccines, which are now getting approved all over the place. Needs to be looked at by more eyes and needs to be looked at by more scientists, but it's hopeful. If you're wondering about how molnupiravir works, it's similar to remdesivir. Maybe you've heard of remdesivir. That's another FDA-approved antiviral drug. It basically blocks the RNA, the ability of the virus to make RNA. So the drug, the antiviral drug, has all of these fake building blocks, and it screws up the enzyme the virus uses to copy its own RNA. Molnupiravir, basically, it puts a bunch of junk in the RNA. It makes a whole bunch of mutations. So as the virus replicates, it just screws itself up so much that it stops working. It's like if you were to copy, pick something like a car, right? When a virus copies itself, it makes a perfectly new car. Molnupiravir, when it copies itself, the car has all of these like weird holes in it. Maybe it's got 17 wheels. It's missing an engine. It's got 17 engines. And the next time it copies itself, it gets even more crazy. So eventually it just fails at its ability to copy itself and then infect the body. Which is why, if you get it early enough in the treatment cycle, you could probably ward off hospital stays, the really serious parts of COVID-19 disease. It's hopeful. In conclusion, more eyes need to take a look at the data. The Merck needs to give as much data as it can to different government organizations. And then if it doesn't appear to have that many drawbacks, put it into circulation and see how it does. Unlike some of the other treatments like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, this one has more eyes on it from skeptics in the scientific community. They're like, yeah, it looks promising. So that's great. That's science news for this week. This week in Pet Science, it's time to talk about drug-resistant hookworms. Oh no. This caught my eye because last week we had the absolutely amazing Dr. Jessica Kanya, vet, on our spaces, and she mentioned that due to changing climate, they're seeing some things infect dogs where they never did before. Ticks, and then she mentioned hookworms. And that got me thinking, and this little article came up and I did a deep dive into it. So if you're wondering what a hookworm is, they have these, hook-like mouths, gross, and they latch onto the intestines of your dog, and they basically eat what's inside the dog's intestine along with blood, and the dog gets super sick, right? Like the dog's not getting any nutrition, they lose weight, they have bloody stool. Eventually, they become very anemic and they could die. And one of the things that was kind of shocking in the study is that these hookworms are becoming multiple drug resistant. And this is from the University of Georgia. So vets right now in the United States rely on 3 different types of drugs to kill hookworms. But it appears that these parasites are becoming somewhat resistant or resistant to most of them, all the 3. This has been reported to be happening before, and it's now been re-reported most recently in the International Journal for Parasitology, Drugs and Drug Resistance. From the most recent study, the researchers focused on greyhounds. So they had one specific type of dog. And the dog, now why would they focus on greyhounds? Well, it has to do with how the parasite spreads. I guess the hookworm really likes the sandy ground. So it's a super good facility for the spread of hookworm. So the dogs are usually dewormed every 3 to 4 weeks. So I didn't know that. That makes sense though, because like Bunsen and Beaker have a dewormer pill they take once a month, just to keep them safe because we live on the farm. After they took a look at the poo of these these greyhounds from this source of infection, the sandy soil at the racing track, they found a high prevalence of hookworm in their feces. 4 out of 5 greyhounds tested positive for hookworm. That's shocking because they were on drugs that should have killed the hookworm. More alarming is that the hookworm remained high, not as high, but high in dogs who were just treated for hookworm. This is a demonstration of drug resistance in this parasite. What could be causing this? There's lots of speculation. You put a bunch of dogs together in a racetrack, you may have a hookworm mutate as it spreads throughout the population, becomes resistant. Maybe kennels, maybe breeding farms. There could be one source of this mutation, but it has to do with letting infection spread throughout large groups of dogs. What does that sound familiar like with our pandemic? Okay, anyways, one interesting point they made is that vets generally don't test dogs after they've been treated for hookworm to see if it's gone. The assumption is, as it has been historically, that the anti-parasite drugs just wipe out the hookworm. So they're not testing to see if it's still there. Another cautionary point to this is that hookworm can actually affect humans. Now, it doesn't make us sick the same way. I believe we get a rash if we're infected with hookworm. And then we could be given a topical drug to kill it, an ointment that contains the dewormer. And unfortunately, if that hookworm drug in the ointment is the same that's not killing the hookworm in the dogs, if a human gets hookworm, the drug won't fight it off in us either. So all hope isn't lost. There's still one drug that seems to be effective against these triple threat resistant hookworms. It's called imodipsydide, some kind of dewormer approved for cats. So it kind of appears that as these worms became resistant to the drugs for dogs, they became susceptible to this dewormer for cats. So go cats. Thanks a lot. This whole thing caught my eye because Dr. Connie was talking about how prevalent hookworm is and where she's treating dogs. And she's in like the central area of the United States. So if you're around that area, and especially around like, I guess throughout all of the central United States, maybe everywhere, the cautionary tale is that make sure your dog is on that triple threat thing. But if they appear to have an infection, get them to your vet so they don't become sick and die. That's Pet Science for this week. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to our show week after week. If you want to know how to support the Science Podcast, here are a couple ways. It's always going to be free to download, so you'll never have to worry about paying for it. But, things do cost money running a podcast, and here are a couple ways you could help us out. One is join our Patreon page. It's amazing. It's growing. It's almost like an extended family. There's multiple tiers of support, and we have lots of fun perks for being part of our Patreon page. The other way you could support us is giving us an awesome review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, anywhere you can rate our podcast. Give us a great review. The third way you could support the show is checking out the BunsenBurnerBMD.com website. We have awesome merch there. We worked really hard finding quality merchandise that's comfortable with vibrant colors. And you'll find in limited quantities over the next couple months, maybe even less, the 2022 Bunsen and Beaker calendar. So 3 ways to support us: the Patreon page. 2, give us a great review. 3, head over to our merch stop and see if there's anything there you'd like. Thanks, everybody. Now on to the interview section. It's time for Ask an Expert on the Science Podcast, and I have Dr. Susanna Harris, science communicator, with me today. How are you doing today, Susanna?
I am great. Thanks so much, Jason. It's quite a pleasure to be on here.
Oh, thanks. I'm so excited to talk to you. I've been following your Twitter account, and occasionally when I'm on TikTok, we check out your videos there too. Where are you calling into the podcast in the world from? Where are you located?
Yeah, so I am in San Francisco, which is kind of a recent change. I moved from North Carolina about a month and a half ago. My partner works out here in San Francisco, and actually I work in Boston. But I work remotely and can do that indefinitely. So I think I have the best of both worlds. Work in Boston, have connections there, but also, I don't know, San Francisco is just really lovely.
It's kind of a cool city, and you're really close to the ocean too, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
The Pacific Northwest is gorgeous.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And the food has just ruined cooking for me
Oh,
in the best way.
oh, so many little restaurants that are all you have their own little flavors.
Absolutely. Super authentic and within walking distance. So very spoiled.
Oh, nice. Got to watch out for those hills, though.
Oh gosh. Yeah, no, it's people joke about it, but it's a real thing here. So Google will try to route you around it though, which I really appreciate. If you're ever a pro tip is that if you're ever in San Francisco and Google says to take the route that takes an extra 5 minutes, take that route. It's helping you.
It knows. Are you from North Carolina originally, or Boston? Like, is that your hometown?
Yeah, actually, so I was born on the West Coast, but majority of my childhood as well as my college years were in Iowa. So I grew up in kind of a small town. It's called Ankeny. It's grown a lot since we moved there. It's right in the middle of the state of Iowa. And then I went to the University of Iowa, which is on the eastern side of Iowa and Iowa City for my undergrad. And I moved in 2014 to go to grad school at UNC Chapel Hill in North Carolina.
Right. So that's what I was going to ask you about. Like you're a doctor, you have a doctorate. Um, that's not a slow procedure. What did you take your undergrad in? Like, what was your journey to get to where you are in your education?
Yeah, so I would say kind of my interest in science predates, understanding what the word science meant. Just kind of that curiosity of what's under this rock. And my parents were super, just such champions of me asking questions, especially my dad, of just, he wouldn't give me answers. It was super frustrating. But I think that that's really the crux of doing scientific research is being frustrated to the point where you're like, you know what, I'm going to put in the effort and I'm going to try to find this answer. So by the time I got into high school, knew I wanted to go into something science, knew I did not want to be a medical doctor or a vet, which are usually the clearest paths for people who want science training. But one day in AP biology, we learned about microbes. We probably spent 2 days on it, and it was just like, hey, here's what microbes are. They're everywhere. They're super tiny. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I have ever heard of because it is something that, I can change, I can touch, but also I can see and I can ask a lot of questions. And it's like literally every surface that we can think of, microbes can be there, at least on Earth. So, so I actually did my undergrad in microbiology as well as a minor in Spanish. And then I learned that I could just be a scientist. I could just continue studying microbiology and get paid for it. So a PhD in microbiology or, a lot of biological sciences where you're doing research for the government are paid. So I was like, wow, best of all worlds. I can go get paid. I can stay in school. I can really dig in and learn about a specific topic in microbiology.
I love that. That's such a big aha moment for some kids. Because like I teach high school, and depending on where the kids come from, where they're coming from, they maybe have had no experience with microscopes or anything. And when they see the I'm trying to think what grade that is, like grade 9 or 10. The first time they see an onion cell, we do a stain.
Yes.
It just like blows their mind away. They can't believe these little blocks of, blobby things we're all made of. And there's some of them are just living organisms, just the block themselves. So yeah, that's pretty fantastic for young people. And it seems like that was maybe your aha moment too. These little tiny things are everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of the impact of teachers, my dad was a high school biology and anatomy teacher for, I don't know, like 8 to 10 years. So I think that a lot of that also inspired him of like, there's probably got a couple classes, 26 kids. I don't know what it is now, but maybe one or two of them will just be like amazed at something. And whenever I help scientists come up with their own personal story, the number of times they reference a specific class in high school it's really cool. And I think
Hmm.
we should give more credit to our teachers of that's really where a lot of this stuff gets launched. And this is often, like you're saying, the first time that students and people get a chance to kind of manipulate the world around them.
It gives me warm fuzzies when that happens with kids.
Mm.
We made a post today about the different grades of school, and high school kids are just kind of sleepy and grumpy. So sometimes it takes a bit
Oh yeah.
to wake them up and get them out of their jaded, sleepy head. So
Yeah. Yeah. In the communication space, it's like, you chat with 2 to 6 year olds, you have really great conversations with 7 to 12 year olds, you just try to make eye contact with 13 to 17 year olds. That's the goal. If you can get eye contact and they say a few words to you, like, congratulations.
that's funny. Emily Kelandrelli said the same thing because she sometimes talks to kids, right?
Gosh, I look up to her so much.
Yeah,
She
she's a
is
cool
such a
person.
great person.
When we were talking, she's like, she loves talking to elementary school kids because they're just
Hmm.
so happy, and they're super easy, and even middle school kids get really pumped up. And then
Hmm.
she's like, high school kids are scary, I don't like talking to them. And I'm like, you're like a crazy famous person, Emily. And these high school kids are like intimidating.
Oh, they're mean, man.
Yeah, they can be. Yeah, they
It's
can be super mean.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, it's so fulfilling when you can get. I like the hard audiences. I think they're
Ah.
fun, and that's kind of how I got into what I'm doing now, actually.
Right. So let's talk about that right now. Like you like your title right now, we kind of chatted, is science communication. Can you talk to us about what you're doing with that? Some people will hear that and they may not be able to wrap their head around what that means.
Yeah. So, and science communication is sort of the title that I have for myself, and that really resonates, and that makes me happy. I think it's something I've wanted to do before I realized I wanted to do it. Technically, my role right now is that I am the manager of engagement and communications for what's called a biotech accelerator.
Oh.
Basically, we help little tiny biotech companies, which means it's a biotech company is actually just that you have some cool product. Maybe it's a potential drug, maybe it's a device that can help people, or it's based on biology, it affects human health, whatever that is. But it's like you have a product and maybe 1 to 3 people, that can be a biotech company. But of course, that needs to be growing. So the accelerator I work for is called zantogeny. It's ontogeny with an X in front of it. So with zantogeny, our job is to take these super tiny biotech companies and turn them into small biotech companies and kind of help them along their way. Um, and my role there, and this is my full-time job, which is cool, is that I have two roles. One is to go out on behalf of Zontogeny and help create educational content, help find entrepreneurs and say, hey, this is what it looks like to get into biotech, or vice versa, talk to scientists and say, hey, I know you've got this really cool project you're working on, and I know in your abstracts you'll say, this could, if continued to be researched on, this could change human lives. This could go out and become a medicine that people
Hmm.
take and is really revolutionary. And I get to go to them and say, what if you were the person to do that? What if you were the person to take this beyond that academic paper? So, and then internally, I actually work with it's called portfolio companies, whichever companies we take on and try to help. I act as their communications consultant. And so I talk with them of like brand building and social media and all that different stuff. But the term science communicator still really resonates with me because I think for me, a science communicator is somebody who specializes in understanding and interpreting science and then communicating it. But communicating meaning understanding the audience that you're talking to and understanding how those two things come together, where I need to be able to look at a scientific paper and distill it down to a couple different bullet points. And then whoever my audience is, whether that's the public or investors or patients, be able to go to them and say, here is that message. I don't need to translate this entire paper, but you need to understand the message that I, as a trained scientist, understand and bring it to you in a way that you can ask questions and you can inform yourself and make decisions.
What a great answer. So I have a couple follow-up questions. The company is on. Can you say that again? I don't want to.
Yeah. Zontogeny. So,
Zantogeny. Okay, yeah. I didn't want
yeah.
to. I didn't want to screw it up when I was.
No. I mean, I think it's probably the hardest part of my job because once I tell people what we do, it's like, oh, that's awesome, cool. It's a fantastic company to work for and work with. But yeah, the quick background of the name, because I think it puts everything in perspective, is that ontogeny is sort of this study of how an organism starts at its very earliest stage, like a single cell, an idea of an organism, and how the different decisions that are made along its growth and development path determine how and what it turns into. What are the capacities of that organism? What are the potential? Did it make all the right decision along its development? We do that for companies, right? Like that's our goal, is to take a super tiny early stage company and help it make those earliest decisions that will really determine how successful it is in the future. And then the X is just like, we do this for drugs, we do it for diagnostics, for devices. If it's health tech, biotech, and it's good science, that's the X factor of whatever you've got. If you are ready to build a company around your science, we are ready to help you make those decisions.
Very cool. And like, so you made a good point. Like, you have the background, the skill set to help those companies, right? If you just threw somebody with a marketing degree at a company, they could do a good job marketing, but they might miss the science part, right? It's like having the best of both worlds with helping to drive and grow these little companies. Though I'd imagine Zontogeny probably does have some specialists in marketing.
We're actually super tiny, so
okay. I'm sorry.
No. I mean, I had assumed as well, actually, coming in, that, and we do. I mean, the nice thing about working at a company that is tied to the investment sector is we are able to pay for consultants and go out and find a PR company that can do some really big projects with us. So I'm sort of a facilitator in some of those aspects. But right now, I think we have 14. When I joined, I think we had 12. So I still get that really small company atmosphere where I know everybody in the company. I work directly with so many people. And I have a lot of freedom. It actually reminds me a lot of doing a PhD project where it's like, okay, what's the cool thing you're going to work on and how is it going to help this group as a whole? And then I have to go out and get those skills.
Cool. Do you get a feeling right away if some of these little companies are gonna be able to make it or are legit, if their science is like super theoretical versus like something that's on the cusp of being reality?
It's a great question. And, that is where the power of the team comes in, because I'm kind of it's called deal scouting. So I go out and say, hey, this is who we are. You want to chat about something? And then eventually I can send them over to what's called our diligence team. And they're going to go in and look at what's the competitive landscape, who else exists. Like, we've got a PhD scientist over there. We've got somebody who's worked in CRISPR in, the big labs and everything. But usually our standard for talking with companies is, have you put it into an animal model? If it's something related to human health, we want to see that. And, different accelerators, different venture capital arms will invest in early stage groups that might not have that. And others are more stringent, where they have to have gone through the clinical setting. But I will say, someone mentioned it to me the other day where they said it's like turning on a time capsule, where if some of these companies that I get to meet, when they have 3 people, if they succeed, those are going to be companies that have 50, 100, 200 people and are producing something that is like changing people's lives. So I feel just incredibly privileged to get to talk with our founders and our scientists, and sit down and say, like, okay, how can I help you?
It's like those little grow dinosaurs that you put in water.
Yes, I love it so much. Yeah, and so you're like, I think this is the shape you're going to take, and then not every company succeeds. It's like a 10% success rate, just to get into the early stages, but the ones who succeed, you're like, oh my gosh! And I helped like the tiniest amount. I helped them build up their Twitter profile or whatever, but ideally I'll just be able to be in cool rooms and lean to the person next to me and be like, I know that guy. He's really cool.
Before we move to the next question, do you have any specific success stories you could share with us, like, or things you're working on with a company that seems exciting or it looks like it's going to pan out, or is that all hush hush, like super secret?
Well, some is hush hush. There's always internal stuff, but I will tell you one of the stories that has helped me feel a lot more comfortable in my job, and that I actually am qualified to be here, because it's a question. Technically, this is an arm of venture capital. I've never taken a business class. I barely understand basic finance. So when I got this job, and my boss said, I think we could use you to help create this educational content and to help grow our brand, I was like, yeah, but do you kind of want somebody who understands your company? But it turns out, if you have a PhD, you're used to picking up new skills and understanding new spaces. So the real trial of this for me, and really the piece that made me feel like, you know what, I deserve to get paid for this. This is cool. Mm-hmm. Is we as our venture side, we raised a huge amount of money. So this number blew me away, but it's a large number for the sector. But it's not extraordinary. It's not bizarre. We raised $515 million to invest in companies. Yeah, right? Like, that's an impossible number. So I and my boss came to me and said, okay, I need you to draft up a press release on this. I've never written a press release. I've never had training on press releases, and I did not understand what it meant to raise a fund. There's levels that we have to think about, the SEC, and am I going to say something that gets us in huge problems? I had this nice framework around me that my boss is going to let me fail in small ways, but he's not going to let me do something that is really, really bad for the company, which I appreciate. But he said, okay, draft this. And then we decided, hey, if we're going to put out this press release, we should put out a press release about some of these really early stage companies that we've just invested in. And well, if we're going to have that, we should probably have a mini press release for each of those companies. We ended up putting out 8 press releases in one day. I would not recommend that. It was a lot of stress.
That's bananas.
Yeah. But the cool part is that by the end, I was able to, he would say, okay, here's the company. We've got some files on them in our server, so have fun. And I would have to go in and look at their pitch decks, and I'd go and look at what they have published. And then I would go in and say, okay, I think I understand the science. I'm going to go talk to the founder and make sure I understand it. And then I'm going to turn this into a piece of communication that journalists and investors and potential entrepreneurs, all of them have to be able to understand. And that's where I was like, if I didn't have the PhD, this would be really, 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 really hard.
Yeah, it's beyond my skill set. And it seems like what's really cool is, while people are investing and there's great money to be made when the successes of your company come to fruition, the company you're with, but there's also great good in the future from it as well.
Yeah. And I think, that's really the basis of communication, is that you have two people on either side of a table who don't necessarily see that they have the same goal, right? That the scientist will say, well, I want to do great science. I want to produce something that is really helpful and stands up to all the rigors and is above reproach. And the investor is going to come in and say, well, I want a product that we can continue to grow, that eventually gets into those clinics and can make money and allows us to invest in more companies in the future. And my job is to sit in between and be like, hey, you have the same goal. Investor, you have money that you need to put in somewhere and grow it. You need to invest in a company that is based on really good science. And hey, scientist, if you want to do that science, it costs so much money.
It's not cheap.
No. So these companies that I'm talking about, there's 1 to 3 people. They've got this, let's say they've got this drug that one of the companies I love working with, his name is TELUS. I just love the founders. They're super cool. They have a drug that is based on a protein peptide that is going to be used for neonate brain development. So super early preemies have issues with developing their white matter. All of this is public information, by the way. And they found a cool compound that they think is going to help the development of these neonates' brains. And like, how cool is that? Like, if this works, oh my gosh, you think about the impact that could have on families and people for their entire lives. And so, it's like I get to go in and help them figure out how to communicate that to their investors and to the public so that they can get funded. And at these levels, these tiny, tiny companies where they have 3 people, they have a drug compound, we're investing up to $2 million in that just to get them to the point where they can do a human clinical trial. And once you get into that, you're looking at $20 to $40 million just to do those early stage human trials. And so when people hear, well, this investor is putting in $20 million, like, wow, that's a ridiculous amount of money. Well, that might barely get that company to the point where it can do a bigger trial.
Oh yeah. I can't imagine. Like, I would love to be a fly on the wall for when, like Pfizer, Moderna, like the COVID vaccines were going, because like they got investor funds so quickly to run those giant clinical trials. And I know they're not cheap, and that's what gave a lot of people such, confidence in the vaccine, was because the clinical trials were enormous.
And they are so expensive. And I will also say, whenever we talk about investors in science, there's this kind of like knee-jerk reaction. I don't think that's a bad thing. To be totally honest, I think that scientists should be skeptical, and entrepreneurs should be really, really, really careful with who they take money from. At the same time, I think that one of the most common conversations I see on academic Twitter is getting a grant and writing a grant, and I didn't get funded for this. You're talking about money. You're talking about investment just from the government. And so I think we need to start calling a spade of, you get $500,000 from the government, get $500,000 from investors, you're still fighting for money. And that's where academic scientists can also benefit of thinking about their communication, of how they write those grants. It's not so different.
Yeah, what are some of the big things in history that have like taken so much money from investors in science? Like the hydrogen economy that was supposed to be in like the 80s, right? That was like a big thing.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean,
and then things like that.
I would say, I think just in general, things cost more to produce than people will realize. And so some of these companies will what's called go public, which means that instead of private investors, VCs, individuals who have a huge to me, right? Like a very, very large net wealth can invest in and take that risk. Now it goes public, which means that the general public can invest in it as stocks. That's a really, really big milestone for a company. And some of these companies go public basically as a research company. They haven't fleshed out how their drug works exactly, or it's not in clinics yet. It's not something that people can buy it. And they're going public for billions of dollars. It is ridiculous. It is pretend money, in my opinion. It's unfathomable. But that's also because it took them $300 million to get to that point, because they're not just paying salaries, but they're paying lab equipment, they're paying hospitals, they're paying everybody in between. And that's what it costs to get through that scientific rigor. If they didn't put in that money, well, it wouldn't get tested. And or I don't want to take a drug that hasn't been tested and hasn't been, given a sign of approval from the FDA. And going back to that idea of the vaccines, although these vaccines have not gotten fully FDA approved, the FDA has given that emergency authorization to be used. That is not something that is used lightly. That is not, that's not something that is given out. That's something where it's like, we trust this deeply, and we are staking our reputation as scientists, as the government, on this. And so we need to get this in the clinics and to people as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm. Canada did much the same thing with the COVID-19 vaccines. Health Canada hasn't proved them. And I think that was a big failure of our government, is that's one of the main things the vaccine hesitant people are up in arms about, is it's not approved by Health Canada. And they probably could have got somebody like you to explain that, what you just explained, and made it makes perfect sense when you listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of people who follow me on Twitter that it just tickles me. It just cracks me up that they follow me. And one is Ottawa Public Health, and they do a fantastic job of science communication. And I love
Ottawa Public Health. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, they're so good because they use memes, they make jokes, and you feel that you can approach them. And I think that that's oftentimes when we talk about communication, it's like, well, how can I tell them things? Honestly, some of the best communication I've ever seen is when somebody barely tells anybody anything. They're asking the questions. They're rooting out in their audience. What does their audience know? What does their audience want to know? How can they make their audience more comfortable asking those questions? And I think Ottawa Public, I'm just going to give them, I love them so much. They're just really nice people. But what I love about their communication style is that they do encourage people to ask questions, and they do respond firmly, but kindly, and they make it clear what their stance is and what they are trying to accomplish with this. And so I think, if people are looking at doing better communications as an individual or as a group, check them out.
If you could explain something, this is something that you're involved with. It's PhD balance. I think that would be really interesting to our listeners.
Yeah, so this is something, PhD Balance is a group that's dedicated to creating spaces for graduate students to learn from shared experiences. And there's kind of a lot of meaning in all of that. But to give it a little bit of context, PhD Balance was originally started as something called PH Depression. And that was because I was a graduate student dealing with depression and had dealt with it for a long time. And this paper came out that showed about 40% of graduate students at any time, at a single point in time, were dealing with depression or anxiety or symptoms of those. And I read this paper and I was like, oh, finally, we finally know these numbers. And I went back and looked into it and I was like, well, we've known these numbers for decades. Why was this not in my orientation, that people are really, really struggling? This would have helped me so much the year before. But also what I learned was even with that knowledge, even with that statistic, I still felt very alone. And I still felt like, well, maybe not my department, because everyone in my department is successful. So PH Depression started just as an Instagram page to see if I could get a handful of other graduate students dealing with depression who are willing to share their face, the face they put out on the world at conferences, in their labs, and then have them share a difficult story about dealing with depression. It's now called PhD Balance because what ended up happening is people jumped on this. Had I known how big this would get, I would have never started it. But people said, oh, you should share this on Twitter. And then it was, I needed a whole team. Right now, we're a team of about 15 to 20 volunteers globally who are helping us create content, who are helping share, who are doing speaking and workshop events. And it switched to PhD Balance because people were like, hey, I want to share my story, but I have anxiety. I have specifically postpartum depression, or I've dealt with racism. Can I talk about that and dealing with that? And we said, you know what, this is not about any one specific challenge. This is about those endemic problems that make grad school unnecessarily awful. People will say grad school is supposed to be hard. Well, a marathon is supposed to be hard too. There's no question. But you wouldn't be given terrible shoes and carry a weight and have no water and have people flinging insults at you and have people say, well, a marathon's supposed to be hard, so you really need to go through all of that as well. No, a marathon is hard enough already. Grad school is hard enough already without dealing with some of these issues that can just tear down your psyche and your abilities and ultimately your desire to stay in your field long term.
I've interviewed probably close to 100 people for the podcast now, and with some of the younger scientists I've talked to, that's a common thread, is they some of them have created their own support network at wherever they are. They've made their own club just because of their experience. So I didn't go through. I didn't go through that. I have 2 undergrad degrees. I did not go to get a master's or a PhD, and I have a
Yeah.
lot of respect for people that do that because I know it's a grind. It's great that there's an organization out there that people can turn to. We'll make sure that the link is in the show notes to our podcast for PhD
Yeah.
Balance.
Yeah. And if you want to find us on social media, it's just PhD_balance. We're across social medias. And then we also have one of my favorite things about running this group is that it is a group. The volunteers have way better ideas than I would have. And I've taken a step back and I'm now the chairperson. Basically, I make sure that they have money to do what they need to do. And we have a president who runs things. And every time I come into the leadership meetings and they've got new projects going on, I'm like, this is incredible. One of the projects is a Discord server that just allows people to have direct conversations with each other and bond over shared whatever they're going through. And it's actually really funny. We have conversations around depression and eating disorders and kind of our base of what we exist for. But we also have some really active channels talking about computer coding or actually PhD pets. That's where people go and drop a picture of their pet. And it's just a really cool bonding experience that people might not get in person.
I wonder, I don't know if this is true or not. I know some guests have said that is like, sometimes it's very isolating in grad school and maybe is this helping that?
I think so. I mean, I think that it's interesting that you bring up that other people have started their own little groups. And I think that that's the big point is that everybody has different needs for how they need their community to look, what it looks like to interact with their community, but every single person needs a community. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I really enjoyed spending time with a lot of my lab mates, and I definitely had some who became really, really close friends. But when the main thing tying you to other people is the shared experience of working in the same lab, you might find that you don't have a lot of other shared interests outside of it. So I think that basically what we know from the kind of traditional Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that not only do we need as human that basic food, water, shelter, safety, we actually need people to find us in esteem. We need to have our own self-esteem. We need to feel like we are reaching towards our potential and that we fit as an entire human. And I think that's where a lot of the isolation comes in is that, we would all go to lab and discuss some of our personal lives, but it was really easy to feel like, well, everybody around me is just focused on science. Well, yeah, you're also not talking about your whole life. You're also talking about science. And so breaking down some of that idea that your entire identity is a grad student, and remembering that nobody's entire identity is as a grad student. You only do that through that just discussion and fellowship and just vulnerability of talking with people about other things.
I love talking to different scientists. One of the things they always say after a chat on the podcast, and we've started this Tuesday Spaces thing on Twitter, is it really helps with their imposter syndrome because they're with all of these other people in their their grad school, their PhD cohort, and they feel less than. They're comparing themselves to their peers, and when I'm like, so much more than anybody about what you're studying. You are not an imposter. So it really helps their esteem and perhaps that mixing with PhD balance of somebody who's in, physics and they're talking to somebody in geology. They're like, whoa, what you're studying is so cool. And that definitely will boost your esteem and knock back that imposter syndrome. And that just seems like that's a tiny part of why people would need this group, but that's very helpful.
Yeah, I think, it's that community first, and it's really focused on who is in our community, who is active there, and how can we just support them in wherever they want to be going. I think, we don't have any presuppositions of what it looks like to be a quote unquote good grad student or productive. It looks different for everybody, but the reality is that where people need support is figuring that out for themselves and then reaching towards that goal. And so we try to provide a space where people can can find that and also find the comfort and the acknowledgement that the challenges they're going through, they're not alone, and it doesn't discredit all of the other work that they've done, and trying to break down this idea of, oh, well, when did you go from being depressed to successful? Well, I'm both. And those things are not in opposition.
I'm just reflecting on different conversations I've had with people. This has been really good for me to hear this in your perspective. Thank you.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of time for this question, but I do want to ask it. Is like as you said, you love the title, or you feel that really it resonates with you that you're a science communicator. Where do you think SciComm should be going? I have my own opinions because we run a science communication account on Twitter that's not as serious, but it's effective. Where do you think science communication should be going, or where should we be as science communicators in a couple of years?
Yeah. And I love that this is on the scale of years, because usually people are saying how can I do this in 2 months? Well, it takes a really long time. It's a full skill set. People have entire professions on this. This is not something that you can go to a one-day workshop, walk out, and congratulations, you're totally proficient. You're constantly building and growing. And so that's part of it. One is I would love to see more opportunities for professional development. There's some really great conferences, but I would love to see more that are focused on specific abilities. And then also this idea, again, of kind of community building, where we can have constructive criticism and discussions. I think one of the issues on social media is that you'll either see people dragged completely across the room for making a mistake in how they communicated something, or, technically DNA isn't the basis of all genetic. I don't care. Look, it's not. Let's give constructive feedback and not just drag people across the floor. And also, the problem that I face, which is I don't know, good problems, but it's really hard for people to give me honest criticism and feedback. And so I pretty much hear only those two sides. I only hear, wow, you're a horrible communicator. I can't believe, I've had people ask if I've paid for my PhD. And I was like, if that was an option and also I had the money, I would, yes. Kind of kidding. Or I have people oh, yeah, this is amazing. You're so great at this. Honestly, neither of those things is super helpful. It's good to have them, but I do wish we could find a way to give each other better, kinder, more constructive criticism. And I don't know. If that exists, I hope that a viewer or a listener will reach out to me and say hey, I've already got this going. Because you get to a certain level and people won't tell you where you could be better.
Then you need to submit your TikTok videos and have them graded. Constructive criticism, not dragging you through the mud, but as a teacher, when I'm grading stuff, I'm this was great. And then you give constructive feedback about where they could improve.
Yes. The problem sandwich or whatever, where it's I love this, work on this thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Cause you just destroy people if all you do is you rag on them and bring them down. And for us, it's constantly correcting our spelling and grammar. I'm is that really that important right now? We try, but
right. Yeah. You need people instead who are responding back and being hey, I was a little confused about this. Could you re-explain this? And you're oh, I totally see where you're coming from there.
Yeah, I love when I get those. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think the flip side too is if you're someone who likes to give constructive criticism, I think that's fantastic. I would strongly recommend though to people if you're going to slide into my DMs, or if you're going to, say, hey, I've got this great feedback for you. Start with that. Say, hey, I've got some feedback that I'd love to share. Would you be interested?
Because unsolicited advice is the worst.
It's just you don't know what mood you're going to catch somebody in, because sometimes you catch them in a mood where they're really excited and they're cool, I want to do better. And sometimes you catch them in the mood where they have read through 15 mean tweets about themselves and they're not going to take that very well.
No.
So, just say, would you be interested in feedback? Is this a good time? And that's usually where I'm oh, thank you. I appreciate this. And I will put this into my work.
Yeah, that resonates with me so strongly. Like, even though our account is like fluffy and like we do tweet vaccine science, for example, we got death threats, right? Like
Oh yeah.
about that. And so like, if you send me a DM about correcting my grammar right after I've read a couple death threats, I might just block you out of spite.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't do that, but that's where my head is at. It's like,
I think
we're all done with this, you know?
one of the things that tells me how long someone has been on social media, it's not necessarily related to the size of their account, but it's like, are you experienced in communicating on social media, is how they feel about the block button. Early on, and I definitely had this myself, I was like, oh, I need to reach, this is my audience. I need to reach them and understand them. And then it was like, I'm going to fight them. And now I'm like, I don't have the time.
They're not
care.
worth it. Those people are not worth it.
No.
They are worth you moving your finger up and pressing block.
Yep. Exactly.
Just like us, you've probably grown really thick skin to that. You're just like, whatever, done. And you just move
it's
on
so
with your
funny.
day.
Yeah, and one of my biggest rules, here's my people who are getting started on science communication or any sort of communication on social media, is that if they don't have their profile picture or they don't have an actual name, if it's like user 02675 or whatever, their opinion does not matter at all. It is worth zero thought. It's going to be really hard, but like that's probably not even really them as a human. If you met them in person, they would probably be a very different person. This is like their version of free therapy, is lashing out at other people. Just learning to let that roll off and just thinking, like they're having a rough day. This is not about me.
Yeah.
This is something for them to work on, and just like block them so fast.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's been good to connect with you over this same issue. Yeah. So yeah, constructive feedback, people. We love it, but please ask first. Okay, let's move on to the next couple questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Sorry, I went on mute for a second just because there was a siren.
There's a siren. Yes. Yeah, Beaker was barking a few seconds ago, so we had the same problem. I don't know what she's barking at. Probably the light. So speaking of dogs and Beaker, we always ask her guests for a pet story from their life. I love this question. Do you have a pet story you could share with us?
I do. So the start of my fourth year of grad school, I made what I consider the worst decision of my life, which was adopting 2 8-week-old stray puppies.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh. I'll send you photos.
Please. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. They're my screenshot or my screensaver for everything. But, yeah, super cute puppies. They were actual trailer trash. They showed up at this woman's property at a trailer park, and she put them on Facebook free and for sale. And I must have been having a day, because I saw this post and I was like, those are my dogs. I need to go get my dogs. And, I think when I originally told people, a lot of people, for good reason, were like, you live alone. You are a grad student. What are you doing? But I knew I could handle it. Like, I took a very logical and like careful look. I had this gut reaction, but then I was like, all right, can I financially afford this? Can I afford this in terms of time? Can I give these dogs what they need? Or am I going to be in a situation where in 6 months I have to give them to somebody else? And I was like, I can do this. I know I can do this. And so I drove out, got these dogs, brought them back. They were full of every single parasite you can think of. Yep. If you see, I'll show you these pictures, and they look like little chicken nuggets with legs, because they're so bloated. But that was the best choice that I made, because they forced me to take care of myself in grad school. I'm a fairly externally motivated person, which means that I need someone else to help me with keeping on top of my goals. And I need someone to remind me how to do things. And these dogs allowed me to take care of something else, which allowed me to take care of myself.
What are the dogs' names?
So the dogs are named Hermes and Athena.
I love it.
Yeah, because they're litter mates, they're brother, sister. And it's also, I was like, wow, there's not a lot of combinations of names that are not romantic, including in Greek mythology. So these 2 siblings that never became more than siblings.
Ooh, 2 puppies at the same time. That's a lot of work.
It was there was one time where I first gave them their worm medicine, and I like babysat them for a long time, and finally was like, all right, I gotta go out to the store for like 15 minutes. I came back and they had pooped everywhere, and they were so embarrassed. And I was like, okay, well, this is what I signed up for. But if you love something, then I think that you put in the hard work to make it happen.
If you are any kind of a dog person, you put up with the puppy bad stuff because there's so much more fun and good that comes from it.
Yes.
Every day is the best day with a puppy. That's what we found with our dogs.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Thanks for sharing your pet story. The other question that we ask our guests for is the super fact, and it's something that that when you tell people kind of blows them away. Do you have a super fact you could share with us?
I do, actually. And my super fact is based on originally like Pew Research. People think that all of these numbers come from like silly online questionnaires or whatever, but like there's legitimate research about social media use. And one of the things that really throws people off is how many people still use Facebook.
No.
I know. Well, because I hate Facebook. That's one of the few things when people come to me and they're like, hey, I need a consultant and can you help me with my Facebook? I'm like, I don't want to use Facebook. I use Instagram, which is connected because it's kind of the basis for a lot of things. But a lot of people, especially younger generations, will say, well, I don't use Facebook because people aren't there. And overall, about 70% of people use Facebook.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm not saying everyone should switch from TikTok I'm certainly not switching from TikTok, Twitter, whatever to Facebook. But I think that we have to be careful when we look around and realize that we have echo chambers where I look around the people who I talk to who are, early 30s, mid 20s and say, where is everyone? They say everyone's on TikTok. Everyone is kind of on Twitter. But realizing that, 70% of people still use Facebook. And so just because I don't use it doesn't mean that other people don't.
Yeah. Yep. Facebook is just a juggernaut.
Oh gosh, I hate it so much. Oh gosh, you go in there and it's just like, I go in there just to creep on people I knew in high school and then just like avoid all relatives.
Yeah. Well, that is a super fact, even though I may be a little super depressed from hearing it. But I can go pet some dogs to help with that. So
yeah.
We have to try a little bit harder on Facebook, I think, science communicators. There's some science communicators that are fighting the good fight on Facebook, and it's just like it's a war of attrition for them, I think, sometimes. So
yeah, bless them.
Yeah, bless the science communicators on Facebook. Yes. Well, thanks for sharing your super fact. The last little section is a fun one. We get to know our guests a little bit more outside of the area of work. And it's the important to you or the hobby section, things you're passionate about. And one of the things you want to talk about is like, you maybe don't have a hobby, but what you love doing is getting up to speed on new tasks and skills you need for projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think part of being on social media and in marketing communication is you kind of try to make things look easy. And I don't think people know necessarily how much behind the scenes work is required to do a lot of these things. Now I can make a TikTok pretty quickly, but let's say, for instance, I realized, hey, I don't have a TikTok presence, and this seems like a really cool platform to make other content. Like you and I, before the chat, were talking about how I shared a video from TikTok on Twitter. Making a video on TikTok is so easy, and it's such a fun way to engage people visually and audibly. But I wanted to learn how to use TikTok. And instead of just messing around with it and kind of figuring it out, like there's a ton of research on what works on TikTok. There's a bunch of YouTube videos. There's actually a bunch of TikToks explaining what helps you be successful and grow and engage with the audience that you want. And it has very, very, very different rules than Instagram. So I actually got in touch with one of my friends who I look up to for her skills in communication and specifically on TikTok, and said, hey, can I hire you to teach me how to use TikTok? And she was like, I guess so. And it was great. We did like 3 different little workshops, and I had her check over my work. And I think I've been using TikTok for a month, and I've got just under 10,000 followers, and I'm happy with all of the different videos I've put out. So I would say my hobby though is like diving deep in a project and learning those stats and just like putting everything I have into something, knowing that whatever I'm creating is something I'm going to use more broadly in my repertoire. So yeah, I don't really, people are always like, show me your hobbies. I'm like, I don't, you already see my hobbies, which is just like talking to people and communication. And, for a lot of people like to have that separation between a hobby and work. And for me, I just really enjoy that my work is comprised of a lot of my hobbies.
I love it. I have a lot of respect for TikTok communicators. Like I've spoken to a few. It's just not something I can wrap my head around with our brand. I'm working on it though, so maybe I need to watch some YouTube videos.
Yeah.
The thing is there's only so much time, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that would be like my biggest piece of advice whenever I do consulting with people is like, do whatever you're doing, do it well. And doing it well looks different to everyone. But the analogy that professor at Harvard, he's a friend, gave me though once is that he's like, let's say you have 5 plants that each need 5 liters of water and you only have 20 liters of water. What are you going to do? And I think too often we give each of those plants 4 liters of water and risk all of them dying instead of just saying, you know what? I can't take care of 5 plants. I have 20 liters of water. 4 plants get 5 liters of water like they need, and the other one goes away. So, focus your attention where you want to and make sure that those things you're working on are successful.
That's great advice. It makes me feel better about letting TikTok go.
Oh yeah. No, not everybody needs to be on TikTok at all.
This has been such an amazing and fun chat. And just again, thank you for taking the time to talk to us on the Science Podcast.
Yeah, it's great. I think I think Bunsen might have been on PhD Balance at one point. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I was like, I remember this.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So so I appreciate that, and I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and with your audience.
Where can people follow you on social media? Like on all your media accounts? We'll put links in our show notes, but where can people follow you?
Tried to follow my own advice, so I have only one handle across pretty much every single platform you can think of, which is Susanna L. Harris. So my full name, which is Susanna, Susanna, the letter L, Harris, Harris, no spaces, no underscores, just Susanna L. Harris. Pretty much everywhere except for I'm not really on Reddit.
Okay, perfect. We'll gather as many links as we can, and we'll throw them in the show notes for you. Including PhD Balance.
Oh, yes, please. That one's actually much more important to me.
Okay. All right. We'll make sure that one's first. Well, thank you. You have a great morning. It's really early for you. So thanks for getting up early to chat with us.
Of course. Thank you so much, Jason.
Okay, it's time for story time with me, Adam. If you don't know what story time is when we talk about stories that have happened within the past 1 or 2 weeks. You know what? I'll start. So, if you don't know, Bunsen can get really talky. He can bark at you, and especially when you get, right when you get home, he just barks at you because he wants you to pet him. So he's raising his voice at you. Yeah, he doesn't like it when you raise your voice back at him. So he was barking at me really loudly today for a little bit. So I said, "How dare you raise your tone of voice at me, boy?" And he got sad. He didn't like it. And he pushed his face into me. I'm so sorry, Bunsen. I didn't mean to make you sad, but you were barking at me so loud.
You hurt his feelings a bit?
A little bit. I feel bad, but I mean, he was yelling at me, so I gave him a taste of his own medicine. And he didn't like it. So I think we're friends again. Okay, Mom, do you have a story?
I sure do. My story has to do with what happened on Saturday. We plan to go to wagon play at Waggles because that lets the dogs run around with their friends and they get tired and they get exposure to other dogs and it's just win-win-win. However, I didn't check the internet and we drove all the way to Waggles and there was a sign out front that said puppy class patrons or puppy people were allowed, but big and small dogs were not. And I didn't go back and check online if that's due to restrictions that are happening here in Alberta. But we drove up, we saw the sign, and I drove away, and Bunsen started to cry. He started to whine, and my heart was broken, because it's like he was a kid wanting to go somewhere and then being told that he couldn't go, and he just was excited and then sad. So I said to Jason, I said, hey, how about we go for a walk around Heritage Ranch, and it's a nice fall day and we're dressed for it, and let's go and walk around. And we did. We went it was an hour and a half, the walk that we went on, and the dogs, it was a big walk, and the dogs were tired at the very end, but it was really great. And that's my story.
Dad, do you have a story?
An exciting milestone was passed on our Twitter account. If you follow the Bunsen and Beaker Twitter account, we zoomed past 100,000 followers on Twitter. Adam mentions it sometimes that it's pretty surreal that we have this huge Twitter account that people know about our dogs from all over the world. And it is kind of surreal to have that many Twitter followers. And if you're following us on Twitter, thank you so much. Right after that happened, I did a kind of an impromptu spaces, and so many people turned out and were so kind and so gracious in telling us what they liked about the account. So it gives me warm fuzzies to know that our account is bringing joy to everybody. On another note, what day is it today? Wednesday? It's Wednesday today. So this podcast comes out on Thursdays, but Tuesday we run Spaces, Tuesday Spaces Unleashed. And Dr. Jen Golbeck from the Golden Ratio was my guest, and we had 450 some odd people come into the space. And that also was super amazing that there's that much outpouring of support for dog content on Twitter in these audio spaces. We were the number one, I think we were either number one or in the top spaces that day on all of Twitter, which is bananas. So if you turned up for that, thank you for coming to listen. That's my story. Not really dog centric, but just to echo what Chris said, it was really nice to walk through the river valley in the fall. It was just gorgeous down there, and the dogs had a good time.
All right. Well, that's story time. Can't wait to see you guys on the next podcast. Bye-bye.
That's it for this week's podcast episode. Thanks for tuning in week after week to listen to our show. Special thanks to Dr. Susanna Harris, who talked to us about science communication and her work with PhD Balance. We'd also like to give a special shout out to our top tier patrons on Patreon. It's growing. It's so exciting. And the top tier patrons get their name read at the end of the episode. Take it away, Chris.
Chris Kelly, Samantha Dodd, Kimberly Bond, Nate Stephenson, Debbie Anderson, Courtney Proven, Renee Hardy, Mary Ryder, Shelby Leggett, Dan Fry, Mary Coos, Katla Lynch, Marianne McNally, Andrea Persons, Elizabeth Bourgeois, Karen Beth St. George, Bianca Hyde, Leela Perillo, Lynn Armstrong, Lisa Swartz, Catherine Jordan, Donna Craig, Lila Asher, Jody Ogren, Liz Button, Kathy Zerker, and Ben Rathert.
For science, empathy, and cuteness.